When we strip away the cultural noise, the judgment, and the assumptions we've been conditioned to believe, something essential comes clear: the real, hidden signs that matter in a woman are not tied to her past, but to the emotional patterns she carries into the present. For far too long, society has encouraged people, especially men, to evaluate women through the narrow lens of history rather than humanity. It teaches that you can somehow detect a woman's sexual past through her behavior, her confidence, or her softness. But life, love, and psychology simply do not work that way. You cannot read someone's past like a book written on their skin. You can only understand them through the emotional truths they reveal over time. When you pay attention to emotional patterns instead of fabricated signs, you start to see something far more valuable: who she is right now, not who she was, not who people claim she might have been. Right now. And that's where the real information lies. Emotional patterns are shaped by experience, yes, but they are also shaped by self-awareness, healing, maturity, and values. These patterns tell you how someone handles conflict, how they show care, how they respond to stress, how they communicate when they're hurting, and how they behave when they feel safe. These are the markers that actually determine whether a relationship can grow, not the myths that attempt to reduce a woman's worth to her past. A woman who has done her emotional work will show signs of openness, not because of her romantic history, but because she's learned how to sit with her own truth. A woman who avoids vulnerability is not hiding too much experience. She's likely protecting a heart that has not yet healed. A woman who expresses confidence is not signaling a history you need to decode. She's expressing self-respect. And a woman who values intimacy and connection is not revealing anything about her number of partners. She's showing you that she understands the depth of emotional presence. These distinctions matter because when people get distracted by myths, they miss the reality right in front of them. They overlook the patterns that actually shape a relationship: consistency, emotional intelligence, honesty, empathy, and communication. These are the qualities that determine compatibility. These are the real indicators of whether two people can build something meaningful together. Not assumptions about the past, not imagined clues, not societal narratives designed to shame more than they enlighten. And the truth is, when you start evaluating someone based on emotional patterns rather than imagined signals, you begin to form connections rooted in understanding rather than insecurity. You learn to ask better questions. You learn to listen more closely. You learn to see someone as a full human being with depth, history, dreams, strengths, and flaws, not as a puzzle to be solved. So if you want to understand a woman, truly understand her, don't search for signs that were never there. Look instead at the emotional truth she stands in today, because the only signs worth paying attention to are the ones that reveal her character, not her past. There comes a moment in every relationship, especially after distance enters the picture, when a woman begins to feel not just the loss of a person, but the loss of an emotional presence. And that distinction is important, because people don't miss bodies, they miss souls. They miss the emotional resonance someone brought into their life. A woman doesn't suddenly long for a man simply because he is no longer there. She begins to miss him when she can no longer feel the steadiness, the reassurance, the quiet support, or the emotional grounding he once offered without needing applause for it. Often, when she's in the relationship, these qualities blend into the background. His consistency becomes part of the rhythm of her life, almost like oxygen, unnoticed until it's gone. She might not fully appreciate the emotional labor he carried, the stability he provided, or the peace he created. Not because she's ungrateful, but because human beings naturally adapt to what feels familiar, and consistency has a way of melting into the landscape until its absence creates a sudden emotional silence. It's in that silence where realization begins. Because when a man who was steady stops showing up, she notices the difference immediately. When a man who listened now offers no ear, when a man who understood now walks away, when a man who created emotional safety now becomes unavailable, that absence speaks louder than his presence ever did. It's not the man she misses first, it's the feeling of being emotionally held. It's the way her heart rested easier. It's the way her anxieties softened in his presence. It's the way he made the world feel just a little less heavy. And women begin to feel that absence deeply when life starts demanding emotional endurance from them. When stress rises, when challenges press in, when loneliness whispers, she remembers the emotional strength he brought into her life. She remembers that she didn't have to carry everything alone. She remembers what it felt like to be supported without having to explain or justify her needs. That is what she begins to miss: the emotional ecosystem he created around her, one she may not have fully recognized while she still had access to it. This is why emotional presence matters so much. It's not about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It's about the quiet, consistent ways a man invests in the relationship: showing up, listening, understanding, holding space, providing comfort, offering clarity, staying steady even when emotions run high. These things don't fade quickly from memory, they linger. They echo. They shape the way she experiences connection long after the relationship ends, and something else happens in that absence. She begins to see herself differently. She recognizes where she overlooked what was valuable. She realizes where she expected without appreciating, where she received without acknowledging. And that insight can be painful, but it's real, Because emotionally present men don't come around every day, and once you've experienced one, you understand the difference between a man who simply exists beside you and a man who truly shows up for you. So when a woman starts missing a man, understand this: she's missing emotional presence, not possession. She's missing the sanctuary he created, not the space he occupied. And the truth she eventually discovers is simple: the absence of emotional presence reveals its worth more clearly than any moment she ever took for granted. There's a quiet truth about human nature, especially in relationships, that we rarely talk about openly. Consistency is often invisible until it disappears. And this is where many women, many people in general, unintentionally take someone for granted, not because they are unkind or unfeeling, but because the steady presence of a good man can become so woven into the fabric of daily life that it stops standing out. His reliability becomes normal. His support becomes expected. His loyalty feels like a given rather than a gift. And it's only when that emotional consistency is no longer there that the weight of it becomes unmistakably clear. A man who shows up, truly shows up, creates a rhythm in a woman's life. He texts back. He listens when she's overwhelmed. He makes space for her emotions, even when he's tired. He tries to understand her, even when he doesn't fully agree. He brings emotional order to moments that could easily become chaotic. He is the calm inside her storm, the grounded voice that steadies her, the presence that reminds her she is not alone. Over time, these gestures start to blend into the everyday. They feel ordinary even though they are anything but. And that is where the taking for granted begins, not in a place of malice, but in a place of familiarity. When something feels secure, the mind relaxes around it. It begins to believe that this person will always be there, that the emotional labor he provides will always be available, that his efforts are simply part of who he is, rather than choices he makes every day to show love. This illusion of permanence is powerful, and it blinds us to the effort behind his consistency. But the moment he withdraws, the landscape shifts dramatically. His silence becomes louder than his voice ever was. His absence becomes bigger than his presence ever felt. Suddenly, every moment of care that once blended into the background takes on a new color. She remembers the late night conversations, the reassurance during her anxious moments, the patience he carried when emotions ran high. She remembers how he made her feel safe in a world that often feels unstable. And it is in this remembering that realization takes root. This is when she understands that consistency is not automatic, it is intentional. It is a form of love. It is energy, time, emotion, and commitment. It is a man choosing to pour into a relationship because he believes in it and because he believes in her. When that disappears, not because he wants to punish her, but because he has nothing left to give or no longer feels valued, the loss becomes undeniable. And sometimes the greatest clarity comes when we finally sit in the space someone once filled. That's when she begins to see the difference between a man who simply existed in her life and a man who showed up for her, with her, beside her. When a woman begins to miss a man she once took for granted, it's rarely about the memories alone. It's about the emotional truth he carried. It's the recognition that someone who was steady, devoted, present, and emotionally generous is not easily replaced. And the lesson that lingers is powerful: consistency is a form of love. And love feels very different when its echo is all that remains. There comes a stage in the distance, after the silence, after the withdrawal, after the space has settled, when a woman begins to see with new eyes. And in that clarity, she starts to understand not only what she lost, but who she became in the presence of the man she once overlooked. This is one of the most profound emotional pivots a person can experience, because it is no longer about missing comfort or familiarity or the idea of companionship. It becomes about recognizing that someone played a meaningful role in her growth long before she realized it. When a woman is with a man who genuinely shows up for her, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, something shifts within her, even if she doesn't notice it in the moment. He challenges her in ways that sharpen her thinking. He supports her in ways that strengthen her resolve. He believes in her in ways that help her believe in herself. Not by fixing her life, but by standing beside her as she navigates it. These are not always the loud, cinematic gestures people talk about. Often, they are the quieter ones: the way he listened without interrupting, the way he saw her potential even when she doubted her own, the way he encouraged growth instead of enabling stagnation. But sometimes, when someone is consistently uplifting, present, and emotionally invested, their impact becomes almost invisible. She absorbs their positivity, their steadiness, their grounding influence without fully recognizing where it came from. She feels stronger, more confident, more supported. But she doesn't always connect those feelings to the man who helped create that emotional environment. Human beings often assume that the growth we experience is self-generated, when in truth, much of it comes from the energy of the people we share our lives with. It's only when that influence is gone that the picture becomes clear. When she faces challenges and no longer has that familiar reassurance. When she finds herself struggling with decisions that once felt easier because he was there, steady, anchored, thoughtful. When she begins to notice the subtle ways her life feels heavier, not because she can't carry it, but because she became accustomed to having someone help balance the weight. That's when she starts to recognize the depth of his presence and the imprint it left on her life. And with that recognition comes another truth. She begins to see the difference between a man who simply existed in her orbit and a man whose presence elevated her. Growth has a way of shining a light backward, revealing who contributed to it. She starts recalling the moments she dismissed his guidance, the times she overlooked his kindness, the days she matched his consistency with complacency. Not out of guilt, but out of understanding. And this is where the missing begins. Not just missing him, but missing who she was when she was with someone who brought out the best in her. Missing the partnership that strengthened her rather than drained her. Missing the version of herself that grew under the influence of a man who genuinely cared. In the end, a woman misses a man most deeply when she realizes that his presence didn't just fill a space, it helped shape her. And the lesson she carries forward is unmistakable. When someone contributes to your growth, their absence becomes a teacher, and the truth it reveals is impossible to ignore.